what a programmer would do to create code that works for an app or for a function in a for an event. This is also, for those of you in the data store thinking how you would access your data store is through an API that would look like this.
So on the table perhaps is the department's personal API. You had your own API.
This is how it would be accessed.
If your NPR review would look like this.
Yeah, so, but you would have to have some data about you somewhere
Okay.
that would be accessible from that query,
Okay.
unless you want to keep it in your pocket, right? Lower.
Okay. Yeah.
My weapon of mass destruction. Okay, so if you look at the Freedom Box, the Freedom Box has a web server that's capable of consuming an API that looks like this and sending back to the requester the data located in the store of the Freedom Box. Building a store is easy. Populating it and then securing it is hard. Those are the parts that are hard. Okay, so what I did first was choose JSON. What does JSON mean? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Now, the weird part about that is that it's not JavaScript and they're not objects. So
That's not weird. That sounds.
so 1 out of 3 is not bad. It is notation. But that's part of why JSON's so misunderstood, because it's not named for what it is. So I've chosen my output format, and you can see that there's a bunch of other things that you can choose as topics. I'm just going to go to the topics button, and let's choose mental health and movie reviews, for example. Now I'm going to create the call. Now look at that. So this is a URI that it built, and this is what your API consumed. This is what your API expects. And what's going to happen is I'm going to use the HTTP protocol and do a put, the verb put, to that server. And the server will say, there's that verb put, here's the content, here's what I give back to you.
You sure it's a put? It's a get.
It could be a get. It's get or a put. It's probably a get. You're probably right. Sorry. You're right. But look, so it says my ID. That's the ID that they issued me. Now, oftentimes for your personal data store, you're not going to issue IDs, because that would mean that everybody who wants to access your data store has to register. What you would probably use is something like OAuth, where they're registered somewhere else and they're submitting a token of security to do that. And in this case, most people don't know, but the OAuth has 2 forms of submission. One is called a 2-legged submission, and the other is 3-legged. 2-legged is when a program just gives you the token and you respond back saying, yeah, I see who you are and here's secure access. A 3-legged is and this is the one that people most commonly know. You say, go to sign in, and instead of signing in, you say, well, I'm going to use Facebook. And click on the Facebook button, and Facebook Connect sends an OAuth request, and it comes back to you to the OAuth server and says, yes, allow this program to, or this person to access your data and now be registered. That's a three-legged OAuth interaction. So we're gonna, we don't see OAuth involved here because I pre-registered at the NPR website. But oftentimes that's what you would. So now I'm gonna click on Run the API Call. And there is my,
Question
here's the JSON that came back. Okay, the API key passed and demos.
You have something to share with the class, Lionel?
Yeah, so I just opened up this npr.org API, and it says, welcome lwolber@gmail.com.
Craig, you opened this
I
stuff
haven't
up.
signed in is the
Whoa.
problem.
So I was chasing after you, Craig. I signed up and I opened up the page. He's sitting next to me.
Oh my
goodness.
Without saying anything to me, he opened it up. He signed in as me.
Whoa.
Whoa, IP-based cookies.
That's right.
Wow.
That's bad.
That's
Very
bad.
bad.
Whoa.
And I trust Joe anyway.
I don't know what to do with that. It was
Well,
It's
I think
weird.
we should, I think we should spend the next half hour taking over NPR the way ISIS took over
Oh, okay.
that broadcast
And
network.
that's
There
being
you
recorded
go.
as well. And,
Greg? Well, why'd you pick JSON as opposed to the other? Is that a relevant question or?
Because I think the others suck.
Because it's awesome.
It's easy.
You could have done NPR-ML.
And it's hard to read.
horrible.
It's awful.
I didn't know, but I was betting.
I'm a little confused, Craig. I feel like I
Just change it.
Well, now
I
it's
feel like I
asking
came
me to
into
log
this,
in.
Which
movie.
is this RSS?
Hold on, hold
Yeah.
on. Let me get back to there again as
I'm,
me
like,
if I
completely
can.
confused.
But excellent, I'm in now. I didn't have to register.
Taken care of.
I just need to hang out at conferences with cool kids.
Yeah.
Is this like a
I didn't know
wizard
that was
to rapidly help you write NPR API calls?
Yes.
Yes. That's,
Okay.
This,
that's what.
And how does this teach
For
us
example.
general lessons about fusion drives in general? Just the way they did it?
Fusion drives is just a metaphor.
I
It's
know.
not.
He's given
So
us
the way they
the,
did it
Well,
is
yeah.
so.
these are baby steps. So we don't have to learn all the semantics and grammar. We get to click buttons and
And
magic. This is Guitar Hero for APIs.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Where's the theme track?
Yeah.
Don't stop believing. Hold on to that
Oh,
feeling.
where's the IW karaoke?
It's
Yeah,
not,
really.
Beautiful.
Matthew first.
Well answered, Matt.
not letting me.
I always wonder what happened to Journey. Is it right here?
Went on a journey, came to IW.
The journey ended.
What?
See, there's a.
There's a
Why is
Steve
Doc?
Perry.
Because it's his computer.
Oh,
okay. We've been saying as each other. It's confused people.
L. Wahlberg.
I don't. I sign in just fine, but then it doesn't remember it when I get there.
Is Doc
Yeah,
running,
you have to sign
Cookie
in
Monster?
explicitly from the API
It
page.
almost works.
But I click on it and it takes me here.
Yeah.
It's very neglected.
Demo was an invalid API key.
Yeah, because you're not signed in either.
Yeah,
It's
demo isn't
very-
that API, you have the real one.
Oh.
No, no, no.
Otherwise everyone just uses demo.
Well,
So how do I get an
Log in.
You know, I find the API.
yeah, see right here where it says sign in, Kevin?
Where's it gone? Oh, no, not there. It was. Scroll left. Oh,
Left.
there, where it says login.
At the very
top.
top.
Ah,
You've got to log in there, not there.
got it,
It's
Well,
the
you
same
can-
login, but it's a separate.
got it.
You know,
Thank
I don't
you.
know how to do an API, but I do know how to log in.
Yeah.
It's where it
That's
says
it.
log in.
When you go to the website,
In this case, the reason I didn't see it is because
An engineer.
my screen's been squished to fit
Yeah.
up on the
Yeah.
projector.
and Nancy and
Wait, my display name of Joe Andrew is unavailable?
There you go.
That probably means you've already been before. So after you go through that 3 times, you say, oh, my email's already taken through. So you may just want to do a password reset. That's what happened to me yesterday.
Yeah, I had to do a reset too to get it to work.
Well, we know they effectively
almost
keep
working.
people out.
Okay.
There I am.
So now you can actually
Here we are.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go back to fields, cause,
Leah, I'm a film producer. I'm a human rights and freedom of speech activist, so you don't need to think I'm security. But she asked me if I could video some of the sessions.
you're welcome
We
to.
are, we are
Fine.
videoing and you are welcome
Oh,
to
you
video.
are too fantastic. I didn't know that.
So I'm gonna choose
We're
Jason
mostly videoing
again.
the screen though, so.
I want
right
you to do
If
a
anyone has
session.
an issue, that's fine.
Of course.
So look at all
We're also
these
recording audio if you want to make
different formats. RSS is probably the most readable other than JSON, but JSON is by far the easiest to read as a person and to traverse as an application.
Thank you.
So I'm going to create the API.
Now you have a key.
Pardon?
Now you have a key.
Now I have a key.
Wow, that's human readable. Imagine what some of the others look like, huh?
No, that's just the query.
Yeah, I know.
Look, it is totally readable. ID is this. Output's JSON. There's the key. And if I could,
You just did backbacks and you can go forward.
The key being the unique identifier for that specific query.
No, for that
No,
user.
for him, you, as a user.
I want to jump in on what Nathan just said for a second, because that is human readable, but it's when you're a certain kind of human.
Human.
When you're in your accountant mode, you don't have to pass calculus. No, I'm serious, because I think we lose a lot of people in STEM,
Yeah.
particularly a lot of the girls.
Yeah.
When we show stuff like that, they just want to run out of the room screaming. You sit them down and you say, you know what? If you can crochet, you know, if you can bake, if you can just have that patient mind. I mean, reading a recipe, is a recipe human readable? You know, half just
No,
this.
it's okay. It's not.
No, I'm not criticizing you at all.
No,
I'm
you're not.
using it as an
No, you're
opportunity
not.
to say, we need to send a clear message. That is human readable. When you're in a certain, just be patient. Just read it. It's very readable.
it's not elegant.
Right.
It's not pretty.
And the JSON, when it comes back in the format that this comes back in, it's not elegant either. But I'll say that there are programs that help you build an API call that is much more elegant. There are some extensions for Chrome, for example, that you can go get at the Chrome website that are called RESTful,
Yeah.
Simple response.
Simple REST, for example, and it's like a little form and you fill it out and you can do OAuth with it and you can design
Yep.
you can design it, and then there's some great websites that will let you take JSON like you're gonna see and paste it in there and it builds the tree for you and tells you
No, I got it. I'm sorry I asked the question. I was being sarcastic. And you took me seriously.
it's a good question. There's nothing wrong with that.
I got
Valid,
that too.
it's a valid.
Yeah,
Once again,
but it
sorry,
is an
I asked the question.
impediment for a lot of people
No,
to
I
get
think it's
involved
very
in
important.
these APIs, and I think the important point to make is that it's not pretty because it's meant to be consumed by a computer, but it is regular and it is simple. And if you take the time, you don't have to be intimidated by it. And you're right that we don't make that point often.
I get high school kids regularly, and I make a point of putting stuff up there and just going through it. I said, now calm down. You're going to be alarmed, but just stay calm. This is readable.
Now,
There's a particularly horrible formatting of this.
very,
It's JSON with HTML in it as well, which is even more fun.
and it's just, bleh, they just put it out there for you. And there's some great, and I don't have the URLs with me, I have it on my machine, I should have brought it, but where you can copy this and then paste it in it, and it'll format it so you can see it really nicely and create a tree for you. There are?
Yeah,
I know, I'm saying there are that'll make the JSON look really nice.
So Craig, what are we looking at here? Is this the query itself, or what is this?
This is the
The result of the
payload
query.
back
This is the
from,
result, okay.
yeah, the
This is
query,
something you can use right here.
that's a programmer can use. I mean, you probably don't want to. This is the query itself.
Okay.
This is what was submitted
Right.
to the API. And here's the output
Uh-huh.
from the API back from the data that NPR
Now,
stores and has on hand, and sends it back to you, and you can peruse that with a program and pull out the elements that you want, and then use them in the way that your program needs. So this isn't, like I said, the most beautiful way to present what an API does, but I hope you can get the idea. Here's the query, and here's the results of the query from information that we're probably familiar with, right? Here's a program about violence in PG-13 movies, comes with plenty of sex and booze. That's a story on NPR. Pardon?
I have an idea, but I'll need Kevin's attention.
Sorry.
The idea is, could we take some API output from here and put it into your indie web blog?
Funny you should say that. So, yes.
I just want to be able to show something you use.
Well, you just ran it through your HTMLizer.
Yeah, I just did that. Can I nick the screen?
Absolutely.
HTMLizer?
Oh, I'm sorry, I made that up. I don't know what Kevin,
I call it unmunge.
I like that, I want one.
you call it what?
Unmunge.
Unmunge.
I don't know.
I have a Uralizer, so I call everything an izer.
Lizer, Uralizer, I like that.
Okay, let's play. Guess what it's going to do?
Do it.
Oh, it's on that screen. Okay.
Yeah. That's what I was.
I know.
Okay, so let's take this over there.
Should you know, Kevin, the back of your screen, it's actually on there, instead of saying indie hosters, when with the cable in front of it looks like it's together, it says indie hooters.
Indie Hooters, the title. I do not.
I like those.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so
P2P porn.
let's do this thing with news and technology and whatever else we feel like. History? Is there a history? Okay.
Food.
It's not always,
Food. Okay.
Food and technology.
And then I'm also going to do
Medical treatments.
a thing in here. So I'm taking it in podcast form. That makes it easier. And I'm saying I only want stories with audio because otherwise I'll get ones without audio, which is not a very good kind of podcast. So then I've created an API call. What that API call looks like is this, blop, which is not JSON.
RSS.
This is an RSS feed, it's a podcast RSS feed. But fortunately, I have a thing I prepared earlier called Unmunge, which will take that feed and turn that into HTML. Only one? That's kind of weak. Why is there only one?
Choose too many checkboxes.
Oh,
History
is
of
it
food and technology.
Has
Take
the
away.
all topics.
Take away history. Take away news.
Well,
yeah.
it should give us. If
Yeah, it should-
taking these
I
away,
mean,
should.
all the-
Should do all those categories.
I think this is an and.
Might
Yeah.
be an
Okay, let's go for
So you're
US.
making it narrow.
and. You're making it narrower though. You
I'll make it.
take
Is this
checkbox.
narrow or broader?
Those are ands. It's making it
Are these
narrower.
ands?
That's our
Can't be
theory.
an and.
That's our theory.
Okay, well let's see.
I don't think that's right.
It should be ors, but yes. So this is. So, I think you're right. They're ands. That's kind of broken, isn't it? Okay, then let's just go with technology because there's bound to be technology.
Just technology and food, okay?
Yeah,
Just
technology.
keep the food. Otherwise you'll lose.
I think the query is giving you
There you
the URL of the feed, not the content of the feed.
Exactly.
Well, it's, no, the URL is
With
giving
the
you the content of
unmunge.
the feed. There's the content of the feed.
There you go. Now you got more.
Now I got more than one. Okay, so let's unmunge that one.
Nope, unloaded. I like that.
And
There you
now,
go.
There we go.
now we have a
Wow.
story, and
Okay, and now
You really need to work on your
and this is
CSS.
food. There we go. Inhalable chocolate.
Oh,
oh, we know the guy who does that.
yeah, exactly.
He's almost here.
Has affectionately been called a mad scientist. But what could be mad about inhaling
That's so cool to
That
watch
is-
that
That's Tom
work.
Hatfield.
No, but that's cool.
Let's
That's
talk
really
now
cool.
about major contributors to the tech sector of the economy, companies like Google or Microsoft or Domino's.
So why did you build
Well
Outbound
done.
if Firefox will just display this?
That's what I was going to ask. So in search? You know, I
So,
would
so,
just
but this,
go
so this
look
is
at
an
that.
example. So we can,
It's an example. It's a good example.
so the question is, why am I doing this? So if I,
If you have a blog, send me
let's
right to you.
let's have a look at the code for this. We may as well go deep. Let's find one. So what I'm doing here, I'm running the universal feed parser, which is a piece of Python code that understands feeds and was written by smart people over about a decade to deal with all the kinds of shitty feeds that exist, but believe me, they are shitty. And then I am taking that and putting it through a template. So I have an HTML template here. So if you know HTML, it is HTML head, blah blah blah, body.
I actually know this shit.
And then what I have is these things that in double curly brackets are saying from the JSON that you get back from the other thing, pull out this element and put it inside here. So I'm putting feed link, feed title there, which is this bit up here, this one up, all up the top, feed link, feed title. So if I look at that element, that's npr.org is feed link, feed title is NPR stories from technology and food. So that's done a substitution there. And I continue doing this in different bits.
This template language is YAML.
This template language is Jinja 2, JNJ2. There are lots of template languages.
Python. Or
Used by a lot
it's
of
Python.
yeah.
So basically, this is again code inside code. So the HTML is the stuff with the angle brackets. The stuff inside the double braces
Excuse
is
me,
actually.
could I pause for a second? Tell me about template language.
So that's I'll trace back. So a template language is basically we're basically taking some HTML and injecting some data into it. So the HTML framework is all this stuff like H1, H2, and things like that. But when I have one of these little expressions like that, that is saying run this piece of Python and see what it prints. So
and
feed
you
dot
pull it in
subtitle.
as a JavaScript up in the header. You're pulling. it
I'm
up
actually
library?
pulling. Well, I'm pulling it in.
Server side.
I'm pulling in RSS from them, and then I'm turning the RSS into JSON
No, but
in the Python
how
code.
does this become code? The server side.
It's server side. It generates the HTML before it sends to the client.
Okay, so,
that
so it's like ASP or PHP, that kind of thing.
And that little
And
thing
that's
you
called
have.
a template language today.
Yeah.
It generates the HTML.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm turning their feed into JSON. So here's the JSON that I'm generating, which is not the same as their JSON.
This is the unlunged part.
So this is like 3 levels of parsing. So there's the feed that we get from them that looks like that, which is a podcast feed. You can give that to iTunes or AntennaPod or something, and it'll make sense of it. I am running that through some code that turns it into JSON, which is stuff Craig was talking about. Now, JSON is a generic way of expressing things with names and lists of things. So if it has a
Value pairs.
yeah. Well, if it's a square bracket, it's a list of things. So this is the list of things, and then inside that list, the first element of the list is this. If I can find where it stops. It's nested. Is this curly bracket thing? And that's a list of, so it says updated that date, subtitle, there wasn't one. And somewhere in there is, let's put this one at the top, it's easier to read. Okay. Subtitle, custom NPR news feed, title, NPR Tourism Technology and Food, link, npr.org. So that's the stuff that I'm injecting up at the top here.
That created that first, yeah. Right.
Yeah, which is where I'm saying feed link, feed title, feed subtitle. Those 3 I'm pulling out from there.
Now, to be specific about this language, the markup language you're assuming is the curly bracket feed dot subtitle, curly bracket. Basically, all that does is it runs a bit of Python and substitutes the result
Yes.
into that spot right into the HTML, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
So the Python's capable of extracting that out.
Yeah, so the JSON data structure is actually, where am I? The JSON data structure is, it basically is valid Python, it's also valid JavaScript. It's one of those conversion evolution things, which it's useful for programs to be able to express the idea of lists of things and dictionaries, key value pairs. So and then you can nest them to arbitrary depth. So you can have lists of dictionaries of lists of dictionaries. And this has got like, I think 2 or 3 levels of stuff in it, because it's got a list of these elements, and each of these elements has a set of fields inside it. And so to build this template, I looked at this stuff, and I said, oh, what I want is that one, what I want is that one, what I want is that one. And then I replace the bits, and I pull out the bits I want with this. Feed.subtitle is a way of saying, from the feed thing, find the subtitle, or feed.authordetail.href is find a link for the author, feed author student name, and so on. And then somewhere in here I've got a loop. Yeah. So here I'm looping through all the entries. For each entry I'm creating one of these creating one of these little pop-outy things that has a title, a link, a summary,
And
audio,
the audio.
and a date, and
Right.
the author. And
Very cool.
Each of those are bits I've pulled out of that JSON and put in here. So I've got entry summary. There's some conditional stuff here. It's like, if there is an entry summary, do this.
So
Let's do that.
after you go through it, and after you go through and parse all of them, then you go back through again and basically generate all of those little drop triangle.
The drop triangle things are just a less nature of a markup thing. So if you
Right.
do,
This generates them. This sort of
Yes.
goes through all the feeds and parses them, and then this kind of takes all that and kind of goes
Yeah.
and generates.
Okay, so let me just add a little summary. So what you've seen is the creation of the query, the return of the payload, and then the programming of how to display it nicely in your
Yeah.
browser.
Can you go back to the query generator real quick, just for a second? I wanted to clarify something that I've API.npr.org/query. Am I right that could be called "give me the shit" or whatever? I mean, that's just what they called it. Right?
Yes.
That's the call. And then
That-
everything
that's
after
their
the
name.
question mark, that's their name for the thing.
That's the ID.
That's the name for the API.
And then
that you're
there's your
actually calling,
key.
right? And then all the rest of this stuff is all sort of the stuff you're giving to that so that it knows what to get back to you.
Right, and then your key, and then the query itself.
yeah. So this is a classic URL. URLs have like a path, which is this bit. Well, a domain, which is where the website, a path, which is the page on that domain, and then they can have this question mark bit afterwards, which is a query.
And that's the stuff to send to that page.
Yeah,
right?
and you're basically saying I want
To that
these
API.
IDs, these assets, this title, this output, and here's my key. But they can decide how to respond to different things there. And also, the other thing to understand about this is this format comes from HTML forms. So if I go back to the simplest version of this, unmun, here I have a little tiny form. So if I look at this form, it says form action equals / feed method equals get. There's an input for the feed URL. There's another input saying it says submit, which means do this. And then there's another little input here for the checkbox that says raw, which will show the stuff at the bottom. And then when I actually run that query, you see I've got the same thing going on here. So I've got question mark feed equals that giant URL I got from them, and then and raw is on, which is the checkbox to means show me the JSON as well. So in a sense, we've got queries inside queries here. I'm passing the result of their query, this one, which is a URL that has that stuff into my form here. It ends up getting escape, which is why it's got extra % stuff in it. Because otherwise, it would look. If you don't do that, then the question marks and the ampersands in there would be fed to mine, not to it. So you need to escape that to make sure that passes through back to them.
So where did that JSON come from? Because isn't the query requesting RSS?
Yes. Now the JSON came from me running that through a feed parser.
So could you just have requested JSON right from the server?
I could do, but then I'd have to change the template. So this is a generic template that I wrote for RSS feeds, particularly, and I made it work for podcasts. And the universal feed parser code, which is in here, is this like very large piece of Python that was started whenever 2002 by Mark Pilgrim, and a bunch of people contributed to it. And this is trying really hard to make sense of every possible feed. And basically, this is code that has learned over the course of 12 years what feeds look like and what random crap people do to feeds, and it tries to make sense of it.
What stupid things do people who are creating feeds?
You would not believe.
Well, I mean, they leave, or they fail to escape the limiters within strings, and they do all kinds of weird stuff like that that just makes it break. Like you can't use an XML parser on RSS most of the time because it's not valid RSS. Or it's all valid XML.
Yeah. So yeah, feeds. Well, the thing we learned with HTML was that people make mistakes. XML decided that if people make mistakes, we just stop. And that's one of the reasons we don't use XML much anymore, because that makes it very fragile. You accidentally put an extra quote in it, and the file goes bad, and the browser, whatever you're parsing will go, oh, sorry, it doesn't make sense anymore. And JSON has a similar problem. If you actually use JSON, if you put an extra quote in JSON, you will have the same thing, it will break the whole file. So you have these structures that are designed to be generated by machines and read by machines, but if people put things in them that break that don't do that escaping thing, then the whole chain will fall apart. HTML is different in that the HTML parsing rules are now defined to cope with people doing things badly and to behave consistently when people do things wrong. And a big chunk of the work that the HTML5 group, or the WOT and then the 3C did, was getting all the browsers to agree what happens if I misplace a quote. So they will all fail consistently, but they will all recover consistently, depending on which way you look at it.
It's graceful failure. Consistent graceful failure.
Yeah, and so
somewhat sensible recovery.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, out of curiosity, what server are you using for your
It's on App Engine.
From where?
Google App Engine. Google App Engine is very easy to get some Python up.
I love when you say that. That's just great. You say Google App Engine because you say it so fast.
Fusion? What he said was Fusion Drop?
It just made me laugh.
Google App Engine.
Yeah, it was
Google App Engine.
Yeah.
Fusion Engine. Google App Engine.
Yeah.
But
Not just Google Engine.
it would also be really easy to
Google
put
App
on
Engine.
on an Nginx server if you already
Google App Engine.
Yeah, no, you can run it directly as easily. The code is not. I don't think I've got anything particularly App Engine specific in here. Oh, you get the manifest maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I could pretty straightforwardly borrow this code, drop it into my
Some
Nginx
big GitHub.
server, Lotion, and have it run in a private environment.
Have at it.
Yeah.
Is this your collection of code on GitHub, Kevin, or do you have more elsewhere? Or?
Yeah, this is me on GitHub. I've probably got more elsewhere because I've got stuff lying around everywhere. But these are my private ones too.
You've been busy.
Well, it's over a period of years, but yes. But yeah, that's the. Well, no, sure. The thing about APIs is we have a well-defined language for expressing I'm asking a question of you, which is that query thing. We have a well-defined language for creating forms to ask those questions, which is HTML5 forms and so on. They will construct the query for you and send that to the server. And then we have a lot of things on the server side that respond to that. So, like the piece of code, where was I? The piece of code that actually responds to that in the Python this is the bit that responds to that query. So it says to get, as Craig was saying, and then it's saying, okay, what's the URL? So I'm passed in a request. Get the feed thing from here. That's the URL I wanted. I'm constructing another little bit JSON-like object here, which is URL feed, no feed found, entry something raw, whether the raw flag is set or not. and then I then run the feed parser on that URL, which this is like a one-line call to that giant piece of Python that's been written by Pilgrim and Aaron Schwartz and people over the years. That fetches that URL, reads the feed, turns it into that JSON blob you saw at the bottom, and then I just stuff these into my JSON blob. I add different data format there. That's what it's doing, and then I throw it to the template. I say, Ginger, here's that template you've got. Put these values in and write it out. So that's the whole of the code that responds to that, because it's able to reuse all these pieces other people have built. You know, the code for feed parser is huge and complicated. The code for Ginger, which is the template renderer, is fairly complicated too, because it's parsing two things at once. But what it means is I can write something that's like, whatever this is, 10 lines of code, to take in the thing in one format and put it out in another format. And that's partly because I've thrown a bunch of code into the template. The template has more conditional logic in it than this does. But yeah, the challenge, so the problem is just doing this simple thing. I think we've gone through 4 different data formats and 3 different programming languages, which is kind of par for the course of the web. The thing that drives you mad on the web is escaping things, putting things inside other things, making sure that when I'm putting a query inside a JSON, inside something else,
in
PHP, that all these different escapings actually work. And the places where it blows up is often where that escaping fails, or the encoding fails. Yeah.
The apostrophe every time would blow everything up till today.
Yeah.
An apostrophe. Yes.
And I'm not even very consistent here. Look, I've got single quotes, double quotes, and that.
Yeah.
So, good. 6 minutes left. Can you, for the rest of you, Kevin's done this amazing work with the indie web things. It's very much around what we're trying to move here around and making people independent. How did where Craig started with APIs fit into that? What you've been doing with indie web?
Okay, so see how much less I can show you in 6 minutes. So what we've been doing with IndieWeb is building our own sites first, and then working out how to interoperate with each other by building the smallest possible API that can work. So
building the slowest possible API.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where I was.
So we have 3 or 4 APIs that we use, and they tend to be very simple. So let's see, the simplest one the simplest one to explain is what we call web mention. Hang on.
Which is brilliant, by the way. I think that's a good idea.
Isn't that cool?
So actually, I'll show you it working first, and then we can go back and see what we're talking about. Okay. So this is my known site. I can post things to this and so on. If I want to, let's do it. If I want to respond to somebody else's post, known is a
known as a new WordPress. Like WordPress.
Yeah, it's known as a site with known.com. It's a blogging platform written by Ben Werdmuller and Erin Gerici, and it implements all this indie web stuff.
He wanted to make it here, but he couldn't do it.
Yeah, he was. So I saw him last night, and
he was here the last couple of times. Yeah.
I saw him last night. Said if I get enough code done tonight, then I'll get there tomorrow. He hasn't got. So I guess he's still coding. And I did leave him at like 10. So that was. So this is a blogging tool. And you can see what code is running because I go to his blog. So this is Ben's known blog, which is similar.
Same CMS.
Same CMS.
But it doesn't need to be for this demo.
No, it doesn't.
He could be looking at my WordPress blog or somebody else's Tumblr.
It's using an API. It's not using something specific.
Sure. Okay. So let's go to my other site. So this is my site. This is a static site that I post posts on. It's not running a CMS. It's just running a bunch of HTML on the server because I haven't got around to writing templating properly yet. It's known as the Cobbler's Shoes. So last night we went to the IndieWeb Homebrew Website Club and posted a bunch of notes. So say I want to mention that I'll go over here and say status update. So there's last night's next. So I'm linking to that.
Left off the apostrophe.
There we go. So I'm posting a status update. It has a link in it. I'll probably get this to Twitter as well, just because we can with that. Remember that for later. So I hit publish. That goes out there. I'll go there in a second as these little things propagate. Okay, there's my post. Now, I linked to my page there. What Known does, because it's hooked into this, it sends a web mention. Now, a web mention is a simple thing that says this post linked to that post.
Where is the web mention stored?
Hang on, I'll get there. It's not stored anywhere. And so you can see here at the bottom of this one, that just shows up as a comment on here. Now that is done. At the top here, we have a link rel equals web mention, and I'm linking out to this service here, API service. And so to send a web mention, it would go that URL source equals one URL, destination equals the other URL.
Okay.
That's all you do.
That's cool.
And then that thing listens to that and goes, oh, this is the destination, it's for that page. I will store it in the space for that page. This is the source. Did it really link to it? Yes, it did. Good. What do they say? Here's the piece that they said. Who said it? Here's their little face. And when did they say it? So it draws that information, and then it puts it back in a form that I can see here. That's actually being done by some JavaScript where I'm constructing a query here to embed. So this is the query.
So that enables the existing page to
So what that query is returning.
show who else has commented on it in its own page.
So that query returns this. Oh no, I need to do HTTP, don't I? File.
So I feel like some of what I'm learning here is some of the mechanisms that IndieWeb is sort of putting out there for pausing stuff.
Posse and Pesos. Both.
Yeah. So this is the result of that query. It's actually the query is generating JavaScript, and then because this is a static site, so it has to run code on the client because it can't run it on the server. And then down here is the list of results of web mentions it got from the database, and you can see the one I just made there. Somewhere in here. So you can see the sort of the way these pieces plug together. But the simple API said I link to you.
Yeah.
And then we can parse that out in different ways. For example, these ones from Tim, these actually came from Twitter because we have a bridge that will translate the Twitter posts into web mentions.
Go back to the one you just posted.
This one? This one? I need to change my icons. This one?
Yeah, and it should hasn't come through yet. I like it on started on Twitter, but I haven't shut up yet.
Yeah, it's on Twitter, yeah. I think that runs every few minutes.
Yeah, it takes a few minutes. See how my face was there in this Twitter?
Yeah.
So I did a star in Tweetbot, and that shows up in Twitter as a star or a like or whatever you want to call it. And then eventually, after the thing actually runs, it'll show up here as a mention of sorts.
Yeah.
Let's say Darius Dunlap.
Oh, you can also see I used the wrong apostrophe.
Well, Tom, it doesn't look like anybody's trying to get in here, so.
Not in the apostrophe.
So that's web mention. That's saying this site linked to this site. We've had things like that for a while before, but the actual ping is much simpler. there's a bit more work the server needs to do because it needs to parse this page and make sense of it. So when this web mention is received, that server parses this page and it looks for special markup in the page. So can we actually see this? Okay, so we have these HTML classes here. E-content, P-name, and so on are microformats markers that explain what's going on. So P-name says everything inside this is the text of it. And E-content says that whole thing is the HTML of it. And then let me find the actual. The timestamp is here. The timestamp is marked up with DT published date time, so that can be parsed by the machine. The my little face there, Kevin Marks published this, is marked up as. Did not? Did that one is marked up as? Yeah. So this is an H card for me. My profile URL, photo for the photograph. I think the name is implied for this one. Or are they doing it?
It's not
The name is implied, I think.
If anybody's wanting, if anybody wants to do that. Although we have the
Yes.
next door. Somewhere.
Oh, it's it, right?
Was this helpful?
Excellent. That's outstanding. Good teamwork too.
So pesos is when something comes back.
What's
Okay.
the
Posse is
acronym?
when
What's
you
the
post something. Posse is when you just post something on your site, and then it goes out. And Pesos is when you post something outside. Say, for example, you phone and Instagram. You like Instagram.
I fear there's entry that
You might take a photo of
makes
you
it
and
more
post it on
critical.
Instagram.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to do that. I mean, Gnome automates it, so basically you're just doing this without having to know how to do it. If you're doing it yourself, there's IndieWebify.org,
Yeah.
which I think
Yeah.
So that sort of walks you through how you have this thing in. So that's quite good. That was built about a year ago.
Syndicate on site.
That's on
And
the
what's
track,
the
what I'm saying
mechanism
is-
for that? I'm familiar with Posse kind of.
I'm not saying dumb it down, I'm going to make it easier.
Yeah,
It's
same.
No, we're trying
It's
to
the same kind of thing where you have
The
something.
most valuable thing you can do is as you
have an
go
endpoint
through
that's
how
like,
to choose, to come and tell us, and then we know what's confusing people. Because
See, my plan is.
So it's waiting for
if I
a
have
pull, it's not a
connectivity-
push.
Yeah.
Waiting for an occasional query.
So, what inspired that, Doc, was what inspired that was when Joyce came over and started asking me about APIs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that's what this came from?
Yeah.
That's good.
I have Wi-Fi off the plane will have Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Almost certainly.
We're looking to have a
Yeah.
safety booth.
I'm playing between San Francisco and New York.
Absolutely.
They tend to.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just too long to expect people to go without connectivity.
I agree.
You could have riots in the aisles. You know, if the people don't get their Facebook or whatever.
Good session, guys.
Thank you.
So were you personally involved in developing that NPR API?
No.
Oh, okay.
If he wasn't going to make the.
But that's kind of cool. I mean,
IP.
between that and the stuff that Kevin was showing.
And
Right
there's
there-
more. I mean, if you do
I mean, right there, you could say, I just want there to be a thing on one of the pages on my website that is all of the NPR podcasts related to technology and food, and it would
Boom.
just automatically just
Boom.
update all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's,
APIs definitely enable mashups very easily.
It's totally, yeah. But it's such a great example for people to just understand.
well, the dots get connected when you see that.
Yeah, exactly. The dots get connected. Yeah. Yep.
What did you design? What API did they put up? NPR's query API. It's just, it wasn't the prettiest API, but it doesn't like it.
Well, I actually like that it's not that pretty because then it calls into question, well, what do I do about it?
Well, I got a lot of ideas for that. but I'm
Because
sure
you,
they-
cause
they
you
do too.
have to then have some, you have to then, it implies that you need to then take this and make it into something useful.
Well, there's
right?
a ton of extensions that when
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you're looking at raw JSON, just fixes it. There's a bunch of viewers that you can then cut and paste or load JSON and it'll fix it.
Yeah, I don't have the problem with the output, the JSON, because once you have JSON, you can do basically whatever you want with it. You know, you stick it right in JavaScript and it works. But the query, you know, like I have to do a mapping from the IDs to the topics. I'm
Yep.
sure that's available somewhere, but
Right.
it's a lot to maintain that.
Yep.
API keys, you know.
Well, but that's just the way they implement it.
Yeah. There's nothing too specific with APIs that's wrong.
No.
Yeah, so that's wrong. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightenment.
You won't.
I've dabbled with that stuff a fair bit, but
Pardon?
I've dabbled with that stuff a fair bit, but
Good.
not enough to be really fluent. I guess my issue is I don't do it frequently enough. I learn things and then I forget them because I don't touch them for a year.
It's easy to do, for sure. And I've done it, and I kind of put it aside till somebody asks. And well, yeah, let me show you how this works.
Yeah. Nobody comes to me asking me to show them how those things work. Well, that's not true. Not nobody. My business partner will ask me how like certain elements of this world work, but it's rare that I get those kinds of inquiries directed at me.
You know who asks me all the time is Doc.
Yeah, that makes sense.